Let's talk about Mean Girls, protected speech, and how that relates to schools. As Rosie discussed in part 1, the First Amendment protects freedom of speech and other forms of expression. So, what is considered protected speech in schools? So, this really depends on whether the school is public or private. Public school officials technically act as a part of the government, so they have to abide by the First Amendment, while private schools have more freedom in what they can limit in terms of students' speech. Though public school officials must act in accordance with the First Amendment, they can still limit or regulate certain types of expression by students. So there are a couple important Supreme Court cases to talk about when discussing protected speech in schools. So this is Tinker v. Des Moines, which defined the First Amendment rights of students in U.S. public schools and led to the creation of the Tinker test to determine if the speech caused a substantial disruption, which weighs schools' interest in preventing disruption against students' First Amendment rights. Another important Supreme Court case to look at is Bethel v. Frazier, as shown here, which established that public school officials can prohibit student speech that is vulgar, lewd, or plainly offensive. So some examples of how schools can and cannot limit student speech and expression are dress codes and student-run newspapers. So with dress codes, schools can control what students can wear, but not with the intent to limit their expression. With student-run newspapers, technically that is school-sponsored speech, and they can censor anything which they deem to have a valid educational purpose, which is in contrast to student-initiated speech, such as what they wear. So technology has really changed the debate over whether schools can regulate students' off-campus speech, especially with regards to social media. A recent case, for example, shown here, Mahanoy Area School District versus BL, the Supreme Court ruled that schools cannot punish a student for their off-campus speech unless it materially disrupts classwork or involves substantial disorder, as was described in Tinker. So how does this relate to Mean Girls? So Regina, shown here, printed out and distributed the pages of the burn book. Basically, that is her publishing the book, and though the book was made outside of school officials could definitely punish her and her friends for this speech, as it clearly disrupted classwork and caused disorder. It also included lewd and plainly offensive language, which, as discussed before, could definitely be controlled by the school. Also, since the school that Mean Girls is set in is public, the school officials could definitely limit their speech and punish them for this. An example from the burn book that would likely be protected speech, as discussed in part 1, but would not be allowed to be published in schools, is this, which is the allegation that Amber D'Alessio made out with a hot dog. Public school officials would definitely not allow it to be published, especially because it caused substantial disorder. And since, again, the high school that they were at is a public school, they could definitely limit and control what the students say.